Kyella disembarked the sleek shuttle with a regal precision that seemed innate to her kind. Her emerald-hued skin caught the station's artificial light, and the flowing silvery fabric of her diplomatic robes shimmered as she stepped onto the bustling promenade. Around her, humans moved about with a curious mix of purpose and disarray, some pausing to stare openly, others casting nervous glances before returning to their tasks. The first true cultural exchange between their two civilizations had finally begun. Ethan Walsh stood at the edge of the arrival platform, watching the scene unfold. He ran a hand through his messy brown hair, silently thankful he had managed to find a clean uniform for the occasion. The human side of the delegation wasn't exactly known for its formalities. It was, in fact, his team's casual, unorthodox approach that had earned them the chance to oversee this historic meeting. That and Ethan's knack for keeping things light under pressure. "Remember, Ethan, we're here to make them comfortable," his colleague and longtime friend Marcus said, nudging him with an elbow. Marcus was Ethan's closest confidant in the diplomatic corps. A stocky man with a permanent grin that could charm just about anyone. He adjusted his sleeves and added, "Even if they look like they're about to sprout wings and start glowing." "Come on, Marcus," Ethan replied with a chuckle. "You promised to behave." "I'm just saying. She's got this whole ethereal thing going on. It's impressive. Makes me feel underdressed," Marcus quipped, eyeing the alien delegation. As Kyella's entourage approached, Ethan straightened his posture and put on his best diplomatic smile. The alien leader scanned the human group, her expression calm but unreadable. When her gaze fell on Ethan, she hesitated, as if assessing him. Then she inclined her head slightly in greeting. "Welcome to Atlas Station, Kyella," Ethan said, stepping forward and extending a hand. After a moment of hesitation, Kyella grasped it lightly, her fingers cool to the touch. "I'm Ethan Walsh, and this is my colleague Marcus Vetter. We're honored to have you here. Your station is less chaotic than I anticipated," Kyella said, her melodic voice measured and deliberate. "I understand the humans aboard are quite eager to learn from us." "We're eager to learn from each other," Ethan replied smoothly, motioning for Kyella and her aides to follow him. "Let me show you around, and we'll see if we can answer any questions you might have." Kyella nodded once, then turned to Marcus. "And you? What is your role in this?" Marcus grinned. "Oh, I'm just here to keep things running smoothly. Think of me as the glue that holds this circus together." Ethan shot him a warning look, but Kyella merely raised an eyebrow. "An unusual approach. Very well. Let on." As they moved through the station, Ethan and Marcus made an effort to engage Kyella and her aides in conversation. They pointed out various parts of the facility: the observation deck with its breathtaking views of the nearby nebula, the cultural exhibit that displayed Earth's history through artifacts and holograms, and even the bustling marketplace where traders from other human colonies bartered goods. "So, do you have anything like this back home?" Marcus asked as they passed a vendor selling exotic fruits from a distant colony. Kyella tilted her head slightly. "Trade exists, yes, but it is more controlled. Our markets are not as open." "Sounds efficient," Ethan said, "but I'd bet it's not as fun." Kyella gave him a faint smile, barely perceptible, but it was there. "Fun is not always a priority." "It should be," Marcus chimed in. "Can't have diplomacy without a little fun. Otherwise, you just get a bunch of grumpy delegates sitting around a table." Ethan suppressed a laugh. "What Marcus means is that we think informal connections are just as important as formal agreements. It helps people see each other as, well, people." Kyella's expression softened, just slightly. Perhaps there is merit in that idea. As the tour continued, the atmosphere grew more relaxed. Marcus kept up a steady stream of light-hearted commentary, drawing occasional amused glances from Kyella's aides. Ethan, meanwhile, focused on Kyella herself, subtly steering the conversation toward areas where their two civilizations might find common ground. By the time they reached the station's central garden, a small but meticulously maintained space filled with plants from Earth, Kyella seemed more at ease. She paused to touch a broad-leafed fern, her expression almost wistful. "This is from your homeworld," she said softly. "Yes," Ethan said. "One of the first plants humans brought to space. It's hardy. Adapts well to new environments." Kyla's gaze flicked to him. "Your species values adaptability." "It's in our nature," Ethan replied, meeting her eyes. "We tend to rise to challenges, find new ways to move forward. I think that's why this exchange is so important." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Perhaps we have more in common than I thought." As they left the garden, Marcus leaned in and whispered, "You're smooth, Walsh. Real smooth." Ethan just smiled. Chapter 2. A Fragile Understanding. The first week of the cultural exchange passed in a blur of formal introductions, structured discussions, and carefully worded presentations. Kyla and Ethan had seen each other in conference rooms and at official dinners, but their exchanges were brief and cordial, nothing more than the required pleasantries. Still, Kyla found herself intrigued by the human negotiator's easy manner. She hadn't expected him to be so composed, so at ease in a situation that surely had his entire species on edge. Ethan, for his part, wasn't sure what to make of Kyla. She maintained an air of composure that bordered on aloofness, but every now and then he caught a flicker of something beneath her calm facade. A spark of curiosity, perhaps even amusement. He decided it was time to move beyond the scripted protocols. It was during a break between sessions, in one of the station's smaller observation lounges, that Ethan found Kyla standing alone, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars. The room was quiet, the hum of the station's life support systems a low backdrop. "You don't get tired of it, do you?" Ethan said, stepping up beside her. Kyla turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence. "Of what?" "The view," Ethan replied, motioning to the stars. "Most people stop noticing after a while. Too busy, I guess." Kyla considered this for a moment before responding. "On my world, the stars are a constant presence. They shine through our atmosphere differently, but they are always there. Here, the perspective is unfiltered." "Unfiltered, huh?" Ethan said with a smile. "I like that. Makes it sound special." She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You do not find it special?" "I do," Ethan said. "But I think it's more than just the view. It's what it represents. All that space out there, so much we haven't seen. It's humbling, but exciting too." Kyla turned back to the window. "Humans speak often of excitement, of exploring the unknown. It is a mindset my people have always struggled to understand." "Really? I'd have thought you'd feel the same, being part of this exchange," Ethan said. "I mean, that's what we're doing here, right? Exploring each other's worlds, seeing what's out there beyond our own borders." Kyla was silent for a moment, then said, "For many of us, this exchange is a matter of necessity, not desire. There are those who see it as a risk." "Risk?" Ethan repeated. "Yeah, I get that. But isn't it also an opportunity? A chance to find common ground?" Her gaze flicked back to him. "You speak as if common ground is easily found. Our histories are different. Our ways of thinking are different." "True," Ethan said, leaning on the window ledge. "But isn't that what makes it worth trying? I mean, sure, we'll stumble a bit, say the wrong thing, make some awkward gestures." He grinned. "But eventually we'll figure it out. We've got to." Kyla studied him, her expression softening just slightly. "You seem confident in this outcome." "I'm not saying it's guaranteed," Ethan said, shrugging. "But I think it's possible. And if it's possible, isn't it worth a shot?" Before Kyla could respond, Marcus strode into the lounge, a datapad tucked under one arm. "There you are. I've been looking all over for you too." He glanced between them and smirked. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just discussing our respective outlooks," Kyla said, her tone carefully neutral. "Outlooks, huh?" Marcus said, setting his datapad down. "Well, let me give you mine. I think we need to focus on what we can actually do together, like that joint logistics initiative we talked about this morning. Maybe something simple like figuring out how to share supply routes. A little cooperation goes a long way." Kyla raised an eyebrow. You believe logistics will foster understanding? It's a start, Marcus said. People work best when they've got something practical to work on. Give them a common problem, and they'll forget about their differences for a while. Ethan nodded. He's got a point. It's not all philosophical debates and lofty ideals. Sometimes it's just about fixing stuff together. That's how trust builds. Kyla looked at the two humans before her, considering their words. It is a pragmatic approach, she admitted. Perhaps there is merit in working alongside each other on tangible goals. That's the spirit, Marcus said, clapping his hands together. So let's get started. I'll pull up the supply route maps. Ethan, you can walk Kyla through the areas we think would be best to test a shared system. Ethan grinned. Sounds good. Kyla, you in? She hesitated, then inclined her head. I will observe your process. If it is effective, I will consider further collaboration. Hey, that's all we're asking, Ethan said, extending a hand to lead her over to the console. Let's see what we can figure out. As they began working together, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The conversation moved from theoretical to practical, and the dynamic between the three of them started to change. It wasn't perfect. Kyla still seemed guarded, and Ethan knew they had a long way to go, but it was a start. Chapter 3, Common Ground. The station's central auditorium was packed, the air alive with the mingling voices of two distinct species. On this particular evening, the station hosted a cultural showcase designed to highlight the best of human and alien artistry. Holographic sculptures spiraled into the air, alien melodies reverberated through the hall, and human dancers performed a traditional Earth routine that earned scattered applause from their alien audience. Ethan was leaning casually against a support beam, watching the proceedings. Beside him, Marcus fiddled with a tablet, muttering about the technical crew's inconsistent lighting cues. On Ethan's other side stood Kyla, her serene expression betraying just the faintest trace of curiosity as she observed the human performances. They're better than I expected, she finally said, tilting her head slightly. Your species' ability to convey emotion through movement is impressive. I'll take that as a compliment, Ethan replied with a smile. And here I was worried you'd find it, I don't know, primitive or something. Not primitive, Kyla clarified. Different. Unrefined, perhaps, but sincere. It is a rarity among my people to express ourselves so openly. Marcus, now done with his muttering, chimed in. So what do your people do for fun? I mean, when you're not running around saving the galaxy or being super mysterious. Kyla regarded him for a moment, her silver eyes narrowing slightly, as if considering how much to share. Our entertainment is cerebral. We create elaborate thought constructs, immersive mental experiences that can be shared by multiple participants. They are far more nuanced than physical performances. Sounds intense? Ethan said, crossing his arms. Do you ever just, I don't know, play a game? Something simple? Something silly? Kyla's lips twitched. What do you mean by a silly game? You know, Ethan said, something you don't have to think too hard about. Something that makes you laugh or forget your responsibilities for a bit. I cannot say I've experienced that, Kyla admitted. Our culture values introspection and refinement. The notion of frivolous play is not encouraged. Well, that's just sad, Marcus interjected, shaking his head. No wonder you're all so uptight. Marcus? Ethan said warningly, but Kyla didn't seem offended. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the stage, where a new group of human performers was setting up. I am beginning to understand why humans often seem so unpredictable, she said after a moment. You embrace spontaneity, emotion, even disorder. It is not something my people are accustomed to. Yeah, we can be a bit chaotic, Ethan said, but it's part of what makes us, well, us. Sometimes you have to let loose to really figure out what you're capable of. Kyla turned her head to study him. And do you believe that approach is effective? Ethan met her gaze and smiled. I do. It doesn't mean we don't take things seriously. It just means we understand that not everything has to be so rigid. As the next performance began, a human quartet playing a hauntingly beautiful piece on string instruments. Kaela's expression softened. The music filled the room, a melody both melancholic and uplifting, and for a moment, she seemed lost in thought. "It's lovely," she said quietly. "It is," Ethan agreed. "Music has a way of bridging gaps. You don't have to understand the words or the culture behind it. You just feel it." Kaela nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is something my people could learn from you. The value of simply feeling." Marcus, who had been silently watching the performance, leaned in again. "You know what would be even better? If we taught you some earth dance moves. That'll get you feeling something, all right?" Ethan chuckled. "I don't think Kaela's ready for that, Marcus. Baby steps." "I have seen your dancing," Kaela said, her tone dry but not unkind. "I'm not sure I am prepared for that experience." Both men laughed, and for the first time since arriving on the station, Kaela allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The rest of the evening passed in a similar manner. Light banter, thoughtful discussions about the differences in their cultures, and a growing sense of camaraderie. By the time the showcase ended, Ethan felt that they had taken a meaningful step forward. Kaela, who had initially seemed so reserved and distant, now stood a little closer, her guarded demeanor beginning to give way to a tentative but genuine interest in the people around her. As they walked back toward the station's residential quarters, Marcus slowed his pace, falling a few steps behind. He gestured subtly to Ethan, who took the hint and dropped back as well, giving Kaela a moment to walk ahead. "She's warming up to us," Marcus said under his breath. "I can tell." "What did I say? Music and a bit of charm always works." Ethan gave his friend a wry look. "You think it's that simple? Hey, you do the deep talks, I'll handle the jokes. Between the two of us, we're practically a diplomacy dream team." Ethan shook his head, but he couldn't help but smile. Kaela's slight smile still lingered in his mind, a small victory that meant more than words could express. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The sound of raised voices echoed through the station's main conference room. The negotiations were supposed to be progressing smoothly, but instead, they had stalled over a single point of contention: resource allocation. Kaela's delegation insisted on maintaining strict quotas, while the human team pushed for a more flexible arrangement. Tensions were high, and neither side was willing to budge. "Your proposal would leave entire sectors under-resourced," Kaela's deputy, Karel, exclaimed, his tone sharp. "It is unacceptable." Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We're not saying anyone gets left out. We're saying we need a system that adapts as conditions change. This rigid approach is only going to cause more problems down the line." Ethan watched from his seat, his expression calm but focused. Kaela, seated across from him, met his gaze briefly before addressing her own team. "Karel, the humans have their reasons, but we must also consider the long-term consequences. A fluctuating system could lead to chaos," Karel interrupted. "It could lead to chaos." Ethan chose this moment to interject. "Or it could lead to innovation. Sometimes, when you give people a little room to maneuver, they find solutions you wouldn't expect. But that only works if we trust each other enough to try." Kaela tilted her head slightly. "Trust is not something that can be given lightly." "Agreed," Ethan said. "But it has to start somewhere. What if we try a hybrid approach? We keep a baseline quota to ensure stability, but we also allow for adjustments based on real-time needs. That way, no one's completely in the dark, and we have some flexibility to deal with unexpected situations." Marcus nodded. "It's not perfect, but it's a step forward. Better than sitting here arguing in circles." Karel opened his mouth to protest, but Kaela held up a hand, silencing him. "I will consider it. That's all we're asking," Ethan said with a small smile. "Let's work on this together. It doesn't have to be all or nothing." The room fell into a tense silence as Kaela's team exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Kaela stood. "We will reconvene in 1 hour. Use the time to refine your hybrid proposal. Karel, join me outside." Karel reluctantly followed her out of the room, leaving the human delegation alone. Marcus let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. "Well, that was fun," he said. "I'm starting to think these guys don't know how to relax." "They're under a lot of pressure," Ethan replied. "We all are. But I think she's willing to listen, even if it doesn't seem like it right now." "You really think she'll go for the hybrid plan?" Marcus asked. "I think she'll try to find a way forward," Ethan said. "She doesn't seem like the kind of leader who lets things fall apart just to prove a point." As the hour passed, Ethan and Marcus worked on refining their proposal. They reviewed the numbers, adjusted the parameters, and discussed how to present it in a way that would appeal to both sides. By the time Kaela returned with her delegation, the human team was ready. Ethan stood as she entered. "We've made some revisions based on your concerns. If you'll allow me, I'd like to walk you through them." Kaela gestured for him to proceed, and Ethan launched into a concise explanation of the adjusted plan. He emphasized the safeguards they'd included to prevent instability, the transparent review process that would ensure fairness, and the built-in flexibility that would allow for quick responses to changing circumstances. When he finished, Kaela regarded him in silence for a moment before turning to her team. "Karel, what is your assessment?" Karel frowned but nodded. "It is more acceptable than their initial suggestion. We would need to monitor it closely, but I do not see any immediate flaws." Kaela looked back at Ethan. "It seems we have reached a temporary. Proves effective, we will discuss making it permanent." "Fair enough," Ethan replied. "Thank you for considering it." The two delegations began to file out of the conference room, but Kaela lingered behind. When the others were gone, she approached Ethan and Marcus, her expression thoughtful. "Your proposal was unexpected," she said. "I did not think humans would be so willing to adapt." Ethan shrugged. "We're just trying to make this work. No one's perfect, but if we can find a way to move forward together, that's what matters." Kaela nodded slowly. "Perhaps there is more to learn from your approach than I anticipated." "Stick around," Marcus said with a grin. "We'll have you thinking like a human in no time." Kaela gave him a faint smile. "I am not sure that would be advisable." Ethan chuckled. "You'd be surprised." Chapter 5: The First Kiss. The observation deck was quiet, save for the faint hum of the station's systems. Beyond the glass, the stars stretched endlessly, a sparkling sea of light that seemed to pulse with each passing moment. Ethan had always found the view calming, even on the most chaotic days. Tonight, it felt especially so. Kaela stood nearby, her posture as poised as ever. The light from the nebula outside cast soft hues across her emerald-toned skin, and her silver eyes reflected the galaxy's shimmer. She was silent, seemingly lost in thought. Ethan approached slowly, hands tucked into his pockets, unsure of how to break the silence. "Long day?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Kaela glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "It has been challenging." "Challenging how?" Ethan leaned against the railing beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. She hesitated, then said, "Negotiations are always difficult, but today was different. There were moments when I felt that progress was within reach, only to see it slip away." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I know the feeling. It's like trying to catch water with your bare hands. Every time you think you've got it, it just slips through your fingers." Kaela turned her gaze back to the stars. "A fitting metaphor. Your people have a way with words." "Some of us do," Ethan said with a small smile. "Others, not so much. But I try." That earned him the faintest trace of amusement on her face, though it quickly faded. They stood in silence for a while, the weight of the day hanging heavily between them. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "You know," he said, "for what it's worth, I think you handled yourself pretty well back there. I mean, not that you need my approval or anything, but I thought you were measured. Fair." Kaela tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Measured, perhaps, but fairness is subjective. What you see as fair, another may see as weakness." Ethan straightened, meeting her gaze. "I don't think it's weakness. I think it's strength, to be able to step back and look at the bigger picture, even when emotions are running high." She looked away, her expression thoughtful. Your perspective is unexpected. That's not a bad thing, is it? Ethan asked. No, Kyla said, her voice softer now. Not bad. A long pause followed, the quiet stretching between them. Ethan found himself watching her, noting the way her gaze lingered on the stars, the slight furrow in her brow that spoke of deep contemplation. She seemed so distant, yet something in her posture, in the way she stayed instead of leaving, suggested she didn't mind his presence. Kyla, he said finally, can I ask you something personal? She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. You may ask. Whether I answer depends on the question. He chuckled softly. Fair enough. I was just wondering, do you ever let your guard down? I mean, do you ever just relax? Her expression shifted, the faintest trace of a smile flickering across her lips. Relaxation is a rare luxury in my position. But I suppose there are moments. Small ones. Small moments are better than none, Ethan said. What about now? Now? Kyla's tone was curious. Yeah, Ethan said. Right here, right now. With the stars, the quiet. Can't this be one of those moments? She seemed to consider that. Slowly, she turned her gaze back to the stars. Perhaps it could. For a while they said nothing more. The stillness of the observation deck enveloped them, and Ethan could feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Kyla's usual aloofness seemed to soften, and her presence felt less like that of an untouchable diplomat and more like that of a person. Someone who, like him, was just trying to navigate an unfamiliar situation. When she finally looked back at him, there was something different in her expression, something almost vulnerable. I have rarely shared these moments, she said quietly. It is strange. Ethan smiled, his voice gentle. Strange can be good. Their eyes met, and for a brief instant, the space between them felt smaller. Ethan wasn't sure who moved first. Maybe it was her or maybe it was him. But before he could overthink it, their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It was simple, hesitant, and yet somehow perfect. When they parted, Kyla's silver eyes searched his, as if trying to read his thoughts. I did not expect that, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Neither did I, Ethan admitted. For a moment, they simply stood there, the silence stretching between them once more. But this time it wasn't a heavy silence. It was something lighter, something filled with unspoken understanding. Kyla's lips curved into the faintest smile. Perhaps strange can be good after all. Ethan chuckled softly, his own smile returning. Yeah, maybe it can. Chapter 6. Building Trust. The air inside the observation deck felt heavier than it had before. Kyla stood by the window, her arms crossed, her usual composed demeanor replaced by an almost imperceptible tension. Ethan leaned against the opposite wall, arms at his sides, unsure of what to say. It wasn't often he saw her like this. Uncertain, maybe even vulnerable. Marcus entered with his typical swagger, carrying 2 cups of something warm. He handed one to Ethan and offered the other to Kyla. Thought you might need this, he said, flashing a grin. It's supposed to be calming. Kyla hesitated before accepting the drink. Thank you, she said quietly. So, Marcus began, looking between the two of them. I'm guessing the big diplomatic blow-up earlier didn't exactly go smoothly. It's complicated, Ethan replied, his voice calm. You know how it is. Different priorities, different approaches. It's not like we're all going to be best friends overnight. That's the understatement of the century, Marcus said, taking a sip from his cup. So what's the plan now? We just keep pushing and hope something sticks. We'll find common ground, Ethan said firmly. It's not going to be easy, but we'll get there. Kyla set her cup down on the nearby console and turned to face them. You make it sound so simple. Do you truly believe that trust can be built so quickly? It's not about speed, Ethan said. It's about taking small steps, showing that we're willing to work together. That's how trust starts, by doing, not just talking. Marcus nodded. He's right. Sometimes it's the little things that make a difference. Like this. He gestured to the three of them standing together. We're not in a conference room, we're not fighting over some policy. We're just talking. Kaela raised an eyebrow. And you believe that talking will solve the larger issues we face? Not on its own, Ethan admitted. But it helps. If we can understand each other better, we can start to bridge those gaps. That's what we're trying to do here. She studied him for a moment before sighing. Your optimism is unusual. Call it what you want, Ethan said. But it's what's keeping this exchange going. If we didn't believe it was possible, we wouldn't be here. Marcus leaned back against the console, arms crossed. Look, Kaela, I get that this isn't easy. You're under pressure from your side, and we're under pressure from ours. But you've stuck around this long. You've listened, you've engaged. That tells me you want this to work too. Kaela's gaze shifted to the floor. It is not as simple as wanting it to work. There are expectations, obligations. There always are, Ethan interrupted gently. But you're the one making the decisions. You're the one who can choose to build something new. She didn't respond immediately, her expression distant as she considered his words. Finally, she said, if trust is built through actions, what action would you suggest? Ethan smiled. How about we work on something together? A small project, something that shows both sides can cooperate. Marcus perked up. What about that supply chain initiative? We've got the basic framework, but it's going to take some fine-tuning. Kaela seemed to consider it. A practical collaboration. That could be effective. Very well. I will review your proposal and make my own adjustments. We will see if this small step can lead to something greater. Great, Ethan said. We'll set up a working session tomorrow. Marcus grinned. See? Baby steps. Before you know it, we'll all be best buds. Kaela gave him a flat look. I would not go that far. Ethan chuckled. That's progress, Marcus. Don't push your luck. As the three of them left the observation deck, the weight in the air seemed to lift just a little. It wasn't a solution, not yet, but it was a start. And for the first time, Kaela allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, trust could be built after all. Chapter 7, The Test. Ethan and Kaela stood side by side in one of the station's larger cargo bays. Stacked crates surrounded them like an urban labyrinth, the smell of metal and machine oil filling the air. The hum of loading drones punctuated the silence as both teams, human and alien, worked under the dim overhead lights. For once, they weren't hashing out treaties or poring over data models. They were here to oversee a simple supply exchange. Fuel cells and medical equipment, carefully weighed and tallied on both sides. A small step toward trust. Marcus appeared, carrying a heavy datapad under one arm. Okay, I've got the inventory reports. We're good to start loading the fuel cells onto their freighters, and they'll hand over the medkits once we confirm the counts match. Kaela gave a slight nod. I appreciate the efficiency, though I would have preferred more detailed logs in advance. Trust me, Marcus said, smirking. We double-checked everything. You'll find it all adds up. Ethan personally signed off on the final numbers. Great, Ethan said, clapping his hands together. Then let's get this moving. The faster we finish, the sooner we can get back to. He was interrupted by a sharp alarm that echoed through the cargo bay. The drone loaders froze, their blinking lights shifting from green to amber. The docking bay doors began to seal automatically, and a voice came over the comms system. Attention! Unauthorized access detected. Security protocols engaged. Ethan frowned and tapped his communicator. This is Ethan Walsh. What's going on down here? A crackling voice replied, We've detected an unregistered transmission from within the cargo bay. Possible breach in communication security. Kaela's gaze turned steely. A breach? Here. Looks like it, Ethan muttered, his expression darkening. Marcus, you've got the security access. Pull up the logs. See if you can figure out where it's coming from. On it, Marcus said, quickly punching commands into his datapad. Okay. Looks like it's coming from over there. He pointed toward a far corner of the bay, near a stack of large, sealed crates. Kyla's aides immediately moved to investigate, their steps precise and measured. Marcus followed, his usual levity replaced with a sharp focus. Ethan glanced at Kyla, who nodded once, and the two of them trailed behind. When they reached the crates, one of Kyla's aides produced a scanning device. The device emitted a soft hum, and after a moment, the aide turned back to Kyla. The signal originates from within these containers. Marcus frowned. I thought all these crates were cleared and logged before we started. Someone must have slipped something in after the fact. Kyla's eyes narrowed. Or someone on the inside allowed it to pass undetected. Great, Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. Now we've got a possible saboteur on top of everything else. Marcus knelt beside one of the crates, inspecting its markings. No way to know for sure without cracking it open. Kyla hesitated, then nodded. Do it. One of her aides stepped forward, expertly removing the crate's seals. Inside, they found a small, sleek device emitting a faint blue glow. The scanning device buzzed softly as the aide examined it. It's a signal booster, the aide reported, likely used to transmit sensitive data off-station. Kyla's expression darkened. A spy. Looks that way, Marcus muttered. But whose side are they working for? That's the real question. Ethan sighed. It doesn't matter whose side right now. What matters is stopping it. Agreed, Kyla said, her voice cold and precise. Shut it down. Marcus stepped back to let the aide handle the device. The hum faded, and the blue glow extinguished. A moment later, the comms crackled again. Unauthorized transmission terminated. Security protocols lifting. The drones hummed back to life, their amber lights returning to green. The docking bay doors slowly unsealed, and the cargo bay returned to its previous state. But the atmosphere had changed. The room felt heavier, the unspoken tension lingering in the air. Ethan turned to Kyla. This is going to put a dent in our progress, isn't it? Kyla's gaze met his, and for once, there was no trace of aloofness, only weariness. It will complicate matters, yes, but it is not insurmountable. Not if we handle it together, Marcus added, his usual grin returning. We got through this little mess, didn't we? Kyla studied Marcus for a moment, then nodded. It appears we did. Ethan smiled faintly. And we'll get through the next one, too. Just another step, right? Kyla didn't reply immediately, but her expression softened. Finally, she said, perhaps so. As the team moved back to their original task, the sense of unease began to fade. They hadn't solved every problem, but they had faced a challenge head-on. It was a small test, one they had passed together. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, it was clear that they had taken another step towards something more than just diplomacy. Chapter 8. A New Foundation. The main conference chamber on the station had never felt so charged with anticipation. Humans and aliens alike filled the room, seated at long tables that stretched toward a central platform. Kyla stood at the podium, her silver eyes scanning the audience. Despite her calm exterior, she could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. Ethan sat to her right, leaning back in his chair, his expression focused yet relaxed. Marcus, seated next to him, fidgeted slightly, adjusting his jacket and glancing at his datapad. Both men looked to Kyla, awaiting her opening words. After a brief pause, Kyla spoke. We have reached the final stage of this exchange. It is not the conclusion of our work, but a significant milestone. Today, we will present the foundation upon which future collaborations can be built. Her voice carried through the chamber, steady and measured. Ethan admired her composure, but he knew how much effort it had taken to get here. The early days of distrust and conflict had slowly given way to cautious cooperation. They had faced setbacks, navigated misunderstandings, and even uncovered sabotage within their ranks. Through it all, Kyla had remained steadfast. Marcus leaned toward Ethan and muttered, She's got them hooked. They're actually listening. Ethan smiled slightly. They should. This is the real deal. Kyla continued, her tone clear and firm. This initiative represents more than a simple agreement. It is a declaration that we can move forward together, not without challenges, but with a shared commitment to overcoming them. She stepped aside, motioning for Ethan to take her place at the podium. He stood, adjusted his collar, and addressed the room. "Kyla's right," he began. "This isn't just a treaty or a set of rules. It's a promise to keep building something bigger than ourselves. We've spent months learning from each other. We've shared knowledge, faced problems, and found solutions. That doesn't mean we're done. It just means we've figured out how to start." The audience murmured in response, and Ethan noticed a few skeptical faces. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a more conversational tone. "Look, I get it. Trust doesn't happen overnight. It's something you earn step by step. And yeah, we've stumbled along the way. But the fact that we're all here at this table shows that we're willing to try. That's what matters." He stepped back, nodding to Marcus. "Marcus, take it from here." Marcus stood, his usual grin tempered by a rare seriousness. "I'm not much of a speech guy, so I'll keep it short. This whole thing, this partnership, was never going to be easy. But you know what? We've proven that when we roll up our sleeves and tackle problems together, we actually get stuff done. So let's keep doing that." The audience's reaction was mixed. Some nods of agreement, some murmurs of doubt. But Ethan could see that Marcus's directness had struck a chord. He stepped back to his seat as Kyla returned to the podium. "We will now hear final statements from both delegations," Kyla announced. "Please remember that this is not the end of our discussions. It is merely the beginning." As the first speakers took the floor, Ethan leaned toward Kyla and whispered, "Nice job up there." She glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you. Your words were effective as well." Marcus leaned in from the other side, his grin returning. "And don't forget me. I mean, come on. I nailed it." Kyla raised a brow. "Your brevity was appreciated." Ethan stifled a laugh, shaking his head. "I think she means you kept it short enough that people didn't have time to disagree." "That's what I'm good at," Marcus said, folding his arms. As the final statements concluded, the room fell silent. Kyla stepped forward once more. "We have much work ahead," she said. "But today we have taken an important step. Together, we can shape a future that benefits both our people." The chamber filled with polite applause. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough to show that the delegations were willing to move forward. Kyla turned to Ethan and Marcus, her calm demeanor slipping just slightly to reveal a hint of satisfaction. "You have both done well," she said quietly. "So did you," Ethan replied. "This wouldn't have happened without you." Kyla nodded once. "Nor without you. Perhaps there is more we can accomplish together than I initially believed." Marcus clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That sounds like a win to me." Ethan smiled. "It's definitely a start."